one of the major challenges for students, who by definition are people who don't know things, but want to know things and are grow, is they are very poorly placed to independently assess the correctness or otherwise of AI outputs. And I think that this falls into sort of two buckets. The first is sort of straightforward hallucination. Margaret Thatcher is the Prime Minister of England today. Well, no, she's not. That's just that. I mean, there are very sort of straightforward hallucinations. But I do think that over time, for basic science material, those hallucinations will trend to zero because the material is very well understood. There's not a lot of variation and so on and so on. And if your AI output is fed by trusted content, then, again, doubling down on reducing those hallucinations. So on the one hand, the challenge is, as a student, you don't know. Now, and as the hallucinations become more and more subtle, students are less and less well positioned to understand that they are a hallucination. The second piece, which is a sort of cousin of hallucination, as it were, is incompleteness. So many of these things have their analog in pre-generative AI world. So, for example, you might say, well, what are the key indicators of eosinophilic asthma in late middle-aged men? And generative AI might come back and say there are 4. Actually, there may be 5, there may be 7. And students, again, are not well placed to identify whether these things are correct. And given the pressures, particularly on medical students, to process information at a very high speed, their ability to sort of stop and go, I wonder if it's 4 or 5, should I go back to the textbook, etc., etc. The context of that discovery reduces the chance that they will identify those critical issues. In terms of trustworthiness, it's challenging. Students are not well placed to do this. Even seasoned professionals are not necessarily that well placed. I was talking to a very distinguished clinician who was saying when he's using generative AI tools, even he finds it hard to understand where exactly in a long answer generated by AI, exactly where the hallucination is occurring. They're no longer kind of just straightforward factual errors. They're much more subtle than that. And again, this is very challenging. So now what are the risks? The risk is the key risk. And again, it's hard to know, when calculators came into schools, people were like, well, will students ever know how to add up? When sat-nav started, will people ever know how to read a map? I think the answer to that is actually people don't know how to read a map anymore. So there is a skill that's lost. There's an anecdotal sense that there is a degree of sort of grind that goes into not merely being able to repeat information, but to have assimilated that information in such a way that you can then deploy it in another situation. Medical students aren't learning certain things about the heart or the respiratory system so that they can repeat those things. They're learning so that they can then apply them to other situations. Now, there was an interesting piece by Ethan Mollick, and it was called The Homework Apocalypse, and what it demonstrated was that students who were using ChatGPT as a support during their learning did significantly less well in summative exams than students who'd actually had to sort of grind through, well, I don't understand this, so I better read it again, and so on and so on. Learning is a very complex sort of multiple input activity. So it's very hard to sort of go, well, this particular bit of the learning input is flawed, therefore it comes out as flawed output. But there is this very real sense that ChatGPT is sort of easing the way and is not ensuring that students have put in that necessary work so that they learn something. Now, again, at the moment, I would say this is highly sort of anecdotal. There's Ethan Mollick's one example of business students, etc., etc. But and we won't know the answer. We won't know whether this is a negative outcome for a while, because it is highly likely that students will optimize their studies in order to pass their exams. And this has been a long, ongoing issue forever. Students are very, very smart. They optimize for the right path. So will students who pass their exams because they are using generative AI be less capable than those students who've optimized their learning to pass their exams by other means? We don't know, and we won't see this until they emerge as doctors and they're in practice and so on and so on. But I think that's the biggest concern, is that there's some critical element of what it takes to learn something and then be able to apply it to another situation that's somehow getting lost, and that we are substituting success in exams, which we've done for decades. I mean, this isn't a function of AI. that AI and exams were sort of made for each other, but not the thinking that's required to pass exams, but simply the mechanics of passing exams. So it's, I think it was an article about in a different domain, essentially said we've traded exam success for thinking success. And I think that's the underlying concern we will see over the coming years.